Here. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rob Schneider. I'm the managing editor for Hotel Investment Today. And we are here for a Level Up Your Impact panel. I'm going to start with Jenny here. Introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Rob. Jenny Bruskel. I'm the Sustainability Advisory Practice Leader at CohnReznick. We're a leading advisory assurance and tax firm. I have over 20 years of management experience, and at CohnReznick, we really help across the value chain on strategies around energy efficiency, decarbonization, waste and water reduction, climate risk assessments, and compliance with certain regulations such as building performance standards.
All right. I'm Matt Gelazzo. I'm the Executive Vice President and Head of Development for HHM Hotels. We are a hotel management and investment platform based out of Philadelphia. We have just about 250 hotels across the US, Canada, and Caribbean with about 35,000 rooms. And we have an investment platform as well where we acquire, we'll do adaptive reuse, we'll do some ground up every now and then as well. And it's across all asset classes across the country.
Sujit?
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good to be with you. My name is Sujit Yoon, and I'm Director of Environment for the Americas at IHG Hotels and Resorts. So welcome home to Atlanta for us. This is the headquarters for our Americas region. IHG obviously has a massive global footprint of more than 6,600 hotels, 4,400 of those which sit in the Americas region. So my team helps to support our hotels in driving progress against our broader global commitments in the areas of carbon and energy, waste and water, and thinking about how we can affect those kind of positive, sustainable outcomes while also thinking about the owner value proposition in mind.
Very good. So we will start on the end here with Sujin. What are the biggest commercial opportunities for sustainability efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really kind of interesting to see all the emerging trend lines in this space over the last couple of years, right? In terms of that growing interest in sustainable travel and sustainability amongst our various audiences, in a way that's bringing kind of a new dimension to the sustainability conversation. That's not just this is the right thing to do, we need to reduce, but actually, how do we drive more value through some of these efforts here? If we think about this in a business travel context, we've seen an enormous volume of inquiries from our corporate customers and travel partners because they are setting their own sustainability commitments. So they're looking at their travel suppliers and wondering, how can you help me to index and move the needle against my commitments there? And so internally, we've seen, even in the last 2-3 years, a marked spike in the number of our corporate accounts, including more sustainability-focused questions and RFPs. And that, I think, is validated across the data you see within kind of the industry from GBTA. They're all kind of looking at this from a different angle, right? We have some customers who say, if you're not able to provide us with data, you can't get into our preferred program. Some are looking at this and saying, well, how do we actually reward and incentivize this by badging and kind of flagging sustainable hotels within our online booking tools? And then there are some that are kind of less mature in their journeys, but know that they want to kind of look at this in a more robust fashion. So gathering the data that's out there right now and trying to figure out like how this can influence our program in the future. But I think generally across the board there, what you see is a strong kind of signal of engagement across the corporate travel sector. On the flip side, leisure guests, right? You continue to see survey after survey talking about this growing interest from consumers wanting to travel more sustainably and having kind of that appetite, particularly when it comes to the newer generation of travelers. I think all third-party research is to be taken with a grain of salt, right? Because I don't think anybody wakes up and says, I want to travel less sustainably.
Right.
But clearly, this is something that's indexing with them and provides an opportunity to engage with guests on this topic. And that's being reinforced in the commercial ecosystem as well. You see distribution platforms, including more sustainability-focused information. OTAs, partners kind of putting badges on sustainable hotels. And even in a non-hospitality context, you see that through kind of different consumer packaged goods products and kind of retailers highlighting sustainable collections and things there. And so all that is affecting kind of this rising floor of awareness around sustainability that's definitely a broader piece of the consideration set than it was previously. And where we sit now, we can't kind of credibly say that sustainability is the sole decision driver. But what we do believe is that it's commercial positioning in a way where it's helping our hotels to compete on price, location, amenities, and keeping them in the conversation versus potentially having them disqualified on the basis of kind of the sustainability credentials there. And I think the other interesting effect this has here is that it's also brought more stakeholders into the fold. So it's not just the sustainability operations and engineering teams that are at the table, but actually the sales and the marketing teams that are now coming and kind of folding in to think about how they can use this in the context of their kind of value proposition for hotels as well. And so with kind of those different perspectives in mind, I mean, at IHG, we've seen some really great collaboration in recent years, thinking about how we stand up a more robust sustainable meetings offering, how we can include more information about sustainability details within our app and our website, how we can provide pathways to third-party certification opportunities in a way that not only helps to meet this growing consumer appetite, but then also helps to provide more opportunities for our hotels to merchandise their investments in this space. And what we hope this affects is this kind of flywheel effect, right? Where as there's more appetite for these types of offerings, we see more adoption of sustainable practices that then further provide credibility into those offerings and provide that kind of augmentation as a differentiator. So again, kind of a different way of thinking about it, and definitely a market shift in kind of the conversation, which is really cool to see.
Very good. This is a hotel investment event, so we can't go without talking about ROI. So Jenny, I'm going to come to you. What are the best ways to show the best business case and ROI for sustainability? And what are the best ways to track and measure that?
Yeah, so when you're looking at sustainability investments, if it doesn't make financial sense, you're not going to get that buy-in. And it's across the value chain, whether it's the investor, the owner, the operator, or the franchisee, right? So you have to look at sustainability investments just like any other capital investment. So with clear, measurable ROI, payback period, tangible financial outcomes. So when I'm evaluating sustainability investments, or when I'm advising my clients when they're evaluating sustainability investments, there are 3 areas to really consider. First, it's the low-hanging fruits, the obvious, the hard ROI, so energy, cost savings and revenue growth. So for example, LED lighting retrofits, typical ROI in that is 1 to 2 years. Smart HVAC systems, building control sensors, typical ROI in that is like 2 to 4 years. EV charging stations, you're attracting a new customer segment, so that can drive incremental revenue. Green certifications on your property, so anything from LEED to EarthCheck and I forgot the other one, it's green something. But those certifications can basically help you win RFPs, like what Sujin was talking about, as well as qualify you for tax credits, rebates, and lower insurance premiums. And then the second area is this kind of intangible benefit that the benefits don't go direct, you don't see it directly hitting your cost savings, but they still need to be monetized. So things like increased customer loyalty, right? There's been studies, I think it was a Cornell University study that said hotels with clear sustainability commitments actually drive higher guest return rates. So obviously, more loyal customers will book more stays. So that can be measured by higher RevPAR. Employee retention. A lot of the younger generation are prioritizing sustainability. And so when you reduce your turnover by 10%, that can save thousands of dollars in recruitment and training costs. Brand differentiation, like what Sujin was talking about. Also attracting your eco-conscious traveler and your corporate clients, again, driving incremental revenue growth. The third area I would look at is the cost of doing nothing. So a lot of hotel owners and operators nowadays see sustainability as a nice to have, but the real risk is not acting at all. So if you fail to integrate sustainability, that can create higher operational costs, business loss, regulatory penalties, as well as asset obsolescence or stranded asset. So when it comes to cost savings, if your property is continuing to just rely on inefficient HVAC, water, and lighting systems, you're going to see your utility costs rise. Customers, the corporate customers, are starting to look for sustainability programs. They want to see that there's carbon neutral meeting packages, waste reduction programs. So if you don't have those in place, you could potentially lose out on those corporate bookings and events. As far as regulatory penalties, cities and states nowadays are implementing laws that require properties or buildings to meet certain energy efficiency benchmarks. And so if you don't comply with that, what you're going to be faced with is basically paying higher penalties and fines, increasing some penalties and fines over the years. Sorry, my mic is going in and out. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Maybe because I'm moving too much, sorry. But so the regulatory penalties and fines, you're going to be paying those every year, or you're going to be faced with having to make these expensive last-minute upgrades that are at an even higher cost if you wait till the last minute. As far as stranded assets, investors and lenders nowadays are avoiding assets that have high energy use, outdated systems, and poor sustainability performance. They want to see that there are sustainable, lower emissions and lower energy use buildings. And then as far as, so these kind of buildings, if you continue to use those systems, the outdated systems, what you're going to see is higher insurance costs, you're going to see potentially loan rejections, as well as devaluations of your assets because of climate risk. And then in terms of investor and financial risk, a lot of institutional investors nowadays are wanting to understand climate risk. From a physical risk perspective, they want hotels to disclose things like flooding, hurricanes, wildfires, how are those impacting their properties? And then transition risk, how are those impacting their properties from a regulatory changes, rising energy costs, or evolving consumer preferences. And so these are the types of risks that properties will face if they don't do anything, if they don't act on sustainability. The other thing about measuring and tracking is that, as I mentioned before, sustainability investments or projects should really be viewed just like any other capital investment project. So that you can track, measure, and report clear KPIs, things like energy savings, carbon reduction, water efficiency, waste reduction. And there are tech solutions out there that, things like smart metering, AI-driven property management systems that can provide you with real-time energy and water usage to monitor the savings, as well as enable prompt corrective actions if needed. Using data analytics platforms, for example, to process your sustainability data, look at trends, make decisions. And then there's also free benchmarking tools out there that you can utilize, things like the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, the Cornell Hotel Sustainability Benchmarking Index, that can give you water and energy consumption data for similar hotel properties so you can compare yourself to your peers as well as identify areas for improvement. And then, of course, the last thing is transparent reporting is always going to foster accountability and continuous improvement.
Very good. Matthew, I'm going to come to you. What are the best ways to change guest amenities to impact hotel sustainability efforts? How can you do it in ways your guests expect and appreciate?
Sure. Yeah, I think, it's an interesting question because I think to everything you just heard, there's been a huge shift in the dynamic of sustainability where from a hotel owner and investor's perspective, not that long ago, it was more of a check the box and how can I do the minimum to say that I have a sustainability measure in place, and that was kind of an afterthought and just something you had to do, to now it's really at the forefront where we've had this new generation of both business traveler and leisure traveler that are coming to expect it, and you can actually capitalize on it in a way that it differentiates you from your other properties, your competition. So if you're going head to head with other hotels, you can use that as a selling point of why a guest will come to you over somebody else. So there's so many touch points we have with the guest where just simple things that now are starting to become expected, like your guest amenities now. We're getting away from the single-use tiny plastic bottles that everybody used to take home, and those that were so wasteful. Now we have the single containers that are refillable in the showers. Instead of putting the plastic water bottles in the guest rooms, now we can actually give guests a reusable water bottle that is a really cool tool that they can use, refill in the hallways with the refillable stations, It's also a marketing tool for the hotel because we can brand it, we can put some cool things on it. But things like that go so far with guests now. Having bikes at the hotel, that again used to be one of those things that you got them, you put them at the hotel and they just sat there. We now are actually doubling and tripling the amount of bikes we're buying for our hotels because guests are using them. And now we're getting into e-bikes and we're getting into more ways where they can get around without using a car. And that's become a huge request we're seeing from guests. And then even simple things as instead of buying the minibar items from across the world and having them shipped and packaged and all that, we can buy them locally. And that saves on a massive amount from shipping and everything else. But it also is a huge amenity to the guests because they want to learn about the local amenities and products that they can buy, from just a great cookie that's being made around the corner to any other products that are being made in that municipality. So there's this whole new wave of sustainability where it becomes a really positive impact to the guest, and it actually at the same time is a win-win for the property because it can save money, it can be more efficient, and it really helps across the board. So we're seeing a lot of opportunities there where it's now becoming the next kind of forefront for us.
Thanks. Sujin, I'm going to come back out to you. Where are the hotel industry's biggest opportunities to continue driving sustainability progress through collaboration or standardization?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of both, right? And kind of the key theme across each of those areas is that this isn't a go-it-alone exercise, right? And so when we think about this from a collaboration standpoint, certainly there are natural opportunities to diffuse best practice across our own IHG estate. But really where we see even bigger opportunity is how we can work across the industry. And kind of contribute on kind of a broader scale forums that help to drive awareness of best practice and kind of key learnings in a way that can influence kind of a rising floor, if you will, of awareness and engagement there. And so we do kind of have proactive engagement with forums like the World Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, the WTTC, AHLA, and GBTA sustainability committees, all with designs on thinking about how can we make this accessible for all hotels, right? So this isn't just a luxury proposition. This isn't just a proposition that hotels that are kind of well capitalized or well staffed can do, but like how can everybody on the chain scale in all locations find those best practice opportunities? First, by understanding what those are, what the universe looks like, and then kind of like what they can use to kind of inspire and adapt for their own purposes. And by doing that, we can also then drive best practice and coalescence around kind of new technologies and things that can help to drive economies of scale down further in a way that offers that opportunity for even further adoption in kind of a future state, right? I think the companion piece there is also just the standardization and alignment of how we think about responsible travel, how we think about sustainability. You've heard all the panelists up here talking about this kind of explosion in a really great way of sustainable kind of commercial applications, just the interest at large. And at the same time, what we see is that there's, especially in an operational context, so many different competing definitions of what good looks like, right? In a procurement context, in a certification context, in sort of like the commercial applications. And so a big topic and focus of us in the conversations we're having is how do we find those opportunities where there's consensus around the things that are kind of the true best practices that will drive impact in a way that we can kind of steer action in those kind of most impactful areas, and also help to streamline ways that create clarity for our stakeholders, whether that's investors, whether that's customers, in a way that there is kind of a true kind of understanding of what good looks like, and it's not different depending on like who you go to. And also, as Jenny referenced, that there is that opportunity to have an apples-to-apples comparison of kind of the different options in this space. And I think both of those pieces in unison will help us to continue driving forward kind of that future of responsible travel that we're all chasing after.
Very good. Jenny, what are the biggest drivers for sustainability in the hotel industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same across all industries, really. But you know, as I mentioned, I think sustainability is no longer a nice to have, and it's really the requirement is being driven by multiple stakeholders. So there's the regulations, regulatory pressures around many cities and states now have enacted laws called building performance standards that basically require existing and new buildings of typically 25, could be 20, 25,000 square feet or larger to meet energy efficiency standards or reduce GHG emissions. So if those conditions are not met, then you face penalties, dollar per square foot of CO2 emitted over the threshold, or it's typically could be up to $500,000 a year, depending on the size of the building. And then there's the investor and financial risk pressure, where investors are and lenders are prioritizing buildings that have, as I mentioned, have lower carbon footprint. So you're seeing, for example, banks giving out better loan terms for more energy efficient buildings. So properties that don't meet those standards are paying a higher financing cost. Also in the EU, buildings that have poor energy ratings are already starting to trade at a lower value, 5 to 7% lower, because investors and lenders view these as high-risk investments. And then there's the customer and consumer side of things that I know has been kind of reiterated already, but customers, meaning corporate event planners, are looking for more sustainability programs. And the customers and consumers, I think, both on the corporate side and the guest side, are looking at things like, do you have those bikes? Do you have those refillable water stations? Do you have EV charging? Do you have compostable utensils? All those things are now becoming much more important. And if you don't have those at your properties, you risk losing those types of RFPs or guests not returning to your properties. I think there's, as recent as 2024, there's a Booking.com survey that mentioned about 83% of respondents said that sustainable travel is important, and 75% said they do plan to travel more sustainably over the next year. And then also globally, there's been studies that show, and I keep coming back to Cornell University because they do a ton of these, but Cornell University, I think, did a study that showed hotels with clear sustainability commitments actually saw higher ADR and higher RevPAR. The LEED certified hotels saw higher ADR and higher RevPAR than the non-certified buildings.
Good. Matthew?
Rob, can I just jump in a little
absolutely,
bit on
please.
top of that? Agree with everything that Jenny just outlined there. And I think, as mentioned, we have kind of global commitments as a company, but as primarily a franchisor, it is solely dependent on how we can influence and make that case to our hotels in the region. And so when we think about kind of like how we make that case, we have very fortunate to have kind of the active engagement and interest from our franchisees. But at the end of the day, everything that we have to do has to make sense from a business perspective, flat out, right? And so, all those pieces that Jenny referenced certainly are part of that conversation. But even further, like, how can we use this as a way that reduces costs and kind of improves operational efficiency in a way that drives sustainable outcomes, right? So not leading with sustainability, but thinking about all those kind of like double dip opportunities. So from an operational efficiency perspective, utilities are obviously an outsized piece on the P&L. So the more you can drive efficient processes and kind of whether that's systems, technology, or operational best practices, you're helping to kind of reduce that line item within the P&L. But then also, if you think about maintenance regimes, right, you're extending the life cycle of very costly capital investments for all these kind of big pieces of mechanical systems, so on and so forth. I think we've kind of hit the consumer piece pretty well here in a number of different angles. So there's definitely the opportunity to engage on that front. And then I think, beyond that is just the broader opportunity to kind of have that license to operate and reputational lift and kind of realizing those benefits there too. So again, it's not just kind of sustainability for sustainability's sake, but how we can find those business cases that drive the sustainable outcomes from a practical dollars and common sense perspective.
Good. Let's move to hotel energy management systems. Matthew, what are the most effective uses of technology and software to help change hotel energy systems?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one because I think we're on kind of the cusp of this just exploding, and it's another one where not that long ago, energy management systems were something that we really shied away from because they honestly created more problems than solutions. And everything from when you had a motion sensor on a thermostat, if your guests didn't move enough overnight, the HVAC would shut down and they would wake up and the room would be boiling. Right. And so it's already come a long way where now those same sensors have heat sensors and they can tell when a body's in the room. They can tell a lot more. You can turn them into night mode where they specifically try and figure out if somebody's in the room sleeping, and they've come a really long way. But I think there's a couple like Verdant that's come a long way with the upgrades in the sensors and the way they're using them. So now you're actually starting to see, to your point earlier, the ROI on these systems used to be 5 to 10 years. Now it's 1 to 2 years. And so all of a sudden it's starting to make sense because it's a lot more immediate for an investor to say, oh, I can get this money back in a year. My hold period's probably 5. Whereas if it was 5 to 10, they wouldn't even think about touching it. So you put those two factors together, and all of a sudden there's a lot more logical investment in these systems. And it even goes into things like your water pumps. You know, before, water pumps used to pump 24/7 nonstop, no matter what. Now we have new technology where it's actually measuring what the flow is, who's using it, and how much you actually need, and can actually turn the pump on and off as it goes. But what I think is most exciting is where we go over the next 5 years as we get AI more involved and we really start to figure out ways to really hone in on the energy usage that, again, can really bring it in, but at the same time not impact the guest experience.
Very good. So we have a lot of smart people on this stage, myself excluded. If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and we'll get to them. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to share that statistic, and I'm Joanna Eason from My Click, and my friends at customers who are working on a commercial project right now. One of the stats out there that is scary is that the recent data from GBTA has some number as high as 80% of corporate travel buyers are seeking sustainability data from hotels. When you look at North America, the percentage of hotels that have a Green Key Global certification or LEED certification is less than 2%. So we've got a massive supply problem. Part of it is that the requirements for achieving certain sustainability performance levels in an industry where the vast majority of our infrastructure work, if you will, is renovation. So it becomes it's exceedingly expensive to retrofit systems. How are you guys seeing solutions for that and bringing that into the industry? And I'm particularly interested in, Jenny, in your response to that, like from a financing standpoint and from a work on the certification criteria standpoint, so that more hotels can actually demonstrate the things they're doing without it being, just unbelievably cost prohibitive or struggling with the payback on that.
Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think you see that in some of the stats where travelers are saying, well, I do want to travel more sustainably, but it's just not available. I don't know where to find it, or it's just not, the options aren't there. So I totally agree with you about the 2%. I think when it comes to retrofitting and these certifications, they can be expensive because I think all of them actually require some kind of annual audit or periodic audit to make sure that you're maintaining those standards and that you're keeping up with them. And so that's an additional cost burden that you might have to hire an employee to manage or something like that. But from a retrofit perspective, I think it's taking it in a practical approach where you have to understand your target audience. Are you going more for the corporates or more for the consumers? And there's certain certifications serve different purposes. And some hotels may benefit from doing multiple certifications because they want to get the corporate events and they want to serve the eco-conscious traveler. But I think you have to look at a kind of a practical approach in terms of what are the low-hanging fruit. I mean, obviously it's your energy and water use. That's typically, and what hotels need to do is really analyze that data, the utility data, to really look at where they may be overspending, and then understand how to cut that down and really conserve. And then by putting these kind of small, shorter-term ROI triggers in, whether it's LED lighting, whether it's the sensors or the thermostats, that can give you that quick win. I think that is one way to look at it, is really identifying those things that will give you that quick win. And then, planning out your longer term, whether it's solar panels or HVAC systems, which, it's going to be more expensive, but it's going to cut down on your longer term operational expenses. So you really have to look at how you kind of piecemeal that out across time and look at your low-hanging fruits first.
And what is your organization doing to help get that story out? I understand all of this, and probably many
So we actually try to, so we use a framework that has been developed by New York University's Stern Center for Sustainable Business. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called ROSI, Return on Sustainability Investments. And I like that framework because it frames sustainability not as a cost center, but as a profit driver. And the methodology really links sustainability strategies to financial performance in various different ways by quantifying both tangible and intangible benefits. Because the problem is a lot of finance folks, professionals, don't measure and quantify the cost of doing nothing, the cost avoidance, or the cost savings, because it doesn't directly impact their general ledger and their accounting books. And so they don't see that as a value creation. And so this methodology really helps companies understand how to quantify the benefits of those intangibles, whether it's reduced turnover and higher employee engagement, whether it's customer loyalty, whether it's risk, reputation management, license to operate, any of those things can be quantified and should be a part of that business case. And that's what we've been trying to help companies understand, is by using this framework and methodology to really quantify and monetize those types of benefits that come from sustainability initiatives that can be and should be used in the business case to warrant those investments.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Thanks. Any other questions, please let me know. Sujin, Matthew, any thoughts on that? Or, no, we can move on to different topics.
Yeah, I think it's as the ROI time period shrinks, it's a much easier case to be made, obviously. And when you get to retrofitting, that's where it gets really difficult, because you have to see that ROI from it and the ability to recoup that, to take that extra step of when you're replacing a system to take it to the next level. And so it's seeing that ROI shrink, and then it's starting to see the data on, as you mentioned, that the guests really looking for that. And that's where kind of my initial comments were, we're starting to look at that as a way to differentiate ourselves. So if we're going head to head with a hotel around the corner, we really play that up because it can be something that sets us apart. So looking at it, to your point as well, looking at it as a tool that we can use from a sales perspective, from a cost savings perspective, rather than something that we have to do or we need to do. It's something that we should do because it's expected by the consumer now. It's also going to save us money, and it's also something that will differentiate us. So really kind of shifting the mindset here on what it is and why we want to incorporate it.
Matthew, are you guys using any kind of special mechanism to separate out the specific sustainability messaging so you can isolate that as the driver of the increase in RevPAR?
Not a methodology per se, but our e-commerce team and our sales team has really started to run with it in a way where we are highlighting it specifically. So we'll highlight initiatives we're doing at the hotel. We'll highlight things that we've done that we've reached LEED certification, or we've reached one of these certifications, or something that we've just recently done in the community. We do a lot of kind of programs in the community in our local neighborhoods, things like that. And we'll highlight those rather than something that's an event happening at the hotel or like that. We actually use that as a marketing mechanism in our social media posts and our e-commerce across the board. So we will focus on those as their own kind of blasts.
So Jenny, the study you referred to at Cornell, that was actually our study. We did a study of a courtyard Marriott renovation where we had a control group stay in the hotel the same period of time. Another group saw marketing messages that you're talking about, and then we looked at the guest satisfaction scores, and ultimately saw a 150% increase in loyalty and retention tied to the messaging. But we've not been able to track anything tied to increase in bookings directly as a result of any kind of messaging. So do you guys have any plans, or do you know Cornell is doing anything where we can start to see that data?
I mean, we don't have any plans right now, but it's something that I'm constantly collaborating with NYU CSB on applying ROSI across a number of different industries. I mean, they've done it in automotive, they've done it in retail, they've done it in CPG, and we just actually did one in the oil and gas industry, believe it or not. And it was more for a business that does oil and gas slurry waste sequestration, so carbon sequestration. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I think the ROSI methodology can definitely be leveraged to, if we have enough data across a time period, it's got to be 2 to 3 years at least, to show how that, how, you know, kind of trying to tie specific customer segments and how they've, to the loyalty and how they've returned to the same hotel time after time or year after year. So we need to have the data to be able to prove it, but that's definitely something that, you know, I think NYU would be interested in.
Sujan, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, and I agree with all those pieces, which kind of speak to the back end of the question. I think the other piece is just kind of the certification piece in general, right? Like the demand signal is unclear for what customers are going to do with that, right? If you say you want certification, it's great. We can provide you with a list of hotels that are certified. Does that mean you're going to shift share? Does that mean there's going to be a greater volume of bookings? Like, what is the kind of end result of like a hotel pursuing the certification? And because some of that is still ambiguous at that point, I think there's a bit of a chicken and the egg, right? In terms of hotels, especially in the US. You know, in Europe, maybe there's greater adoption of certification just because of other market forces there. But I think until we're able to kind of make that one-to-one connection that says like, okay, a customer says they want certification in their RFP, and because they're exclusively looking at this pool of certified hotels, they're willing to say X. We haven't yet seen kind of that articulation yet, so it's for us to then, as an optional kind of pathway to say, you should get certified because you will realize X, Y, and Z immediate benefits. Absolutely, we want to be able to get to the point where we have that data to be able to translate the one-to-one connection for, because of this sustainability message or because of this sustainability factor, we're able to kind of draw kind of a direct correlation to that piece. And I think that's certainly the holy grail that we're chasing after there. But you know, finding a way to do that that divorces the sustainability piece versus like other factors that may influence that, I think has been tricky for us thus far. And I think also just getting back to the conversation around standardization and alignment, right? Certification is incredibly fragmented. When you think about like what the conversation is right now, a certification like Green Key Global is positioned in the same breath as LEED. And they're like two completely different processes altogether, right? Like a very intensive building certification like LEED or like an ASHRAE audit or EDGE certification is being kind of referenced in the same breath as a very operationally focused certification like a Green Key Global or EarthCheck, which are all very reputable programs in their own right. But because there's not kind of a signal to say that like, no, actually we want this one versus this one, and they're kind of all positioned the same there, there's also not kind of a consensus on like what makes the most sense for hotels to dive into. So I think a lot of those factors maybe kind of hedge the amount of participation in those types of pieces. So you know, we're certainly clearly invested in trying to figure out like what that kind of looks like on the back end. But I just don't think that's kind of what we're seeing materialize in the current conversations thus far.
Very good. We started late, so we'll go a little bit late, but we will get this done before the reception, I assure you. Just a couple more minutes. Why don't we, if you have any other questions, please raise your hand. But yeah, go ahead, in back. Wait for the microphone, sorry.
I'm Nick with Sensor Industries. We're a water conservation sensor and IoT company. So when I kind of reflect on sort of sustainability as a burgeoning aspect of hospitality, you know, a couple decades ago, it didn't help but like think or feel like sustainability was sort of shirked onto the guest experience, where it's like, hey, you know, be mindful. You're in a drought region. You know, think about that when you take a shower. Hang up your towel instead of throwing it on the ground. These kinds of activities that I'm very happy to adopt and subscribe to, but it's sort of an honor system. You can't really manage that, you know, holistically and know how well it's going. And then since then, it's just like every year on these sustainability panels, I hear, you know, better and better activities and ownership of sustainability from the actual hotel groups themselves. So I'm curious, as this continues to motor on, you got to assess what's going to show up most positively on the ledger. You know, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and where do you intend to go next? Is it, you know, assessing your commodities consumption, or is it supply chain? Just trying to get a pulse from the early adopters who have done it, the owners, the operators, the investigators. You know, what are you seeing?
Any thoughts there? Sujan, you want to start?
What doesn't work is guilting the guest, right? Or shaming them into kind of taking a practice there. Like at the end of the day, we are still a hospitality company, and like we don't want to kind of violate the trust and kind of the comfort of the guest experience in the name of kind of trying to index a sustainability kind of progress piece there. And so when we think about kind of these emerging guest engagement opportunities, it's really how do we think about this in a way that places the guest as the hero in the story, right? Because you are doing this, you are helping to affect X, Y, and Z. The bulk amenities that we're providing you are still providing you with the same high quality pieces that you know and love, but you're getting more of it in a more convenient factor. And so like thinking about that orientation in our storytelling has been kind of definitely one of the pieces that we've picked up on in a way that like kind of gently empowers the choices if it's there without kind of preaching or putting it upon them. And so that's certainly kind of the initial ways that we're thinking about like more broad ways to message and engage our guests on some of these activities. But you're right that there is kind of a lot of opportunity and ripe opportunity in this space. That's clearly the demand signal and the appetite is coming through stronger in the last couple of years than it was previously. So definitely fertile ground for more.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's a couple of pieces to it. I think there's on the building side and the systems and all of that, it's pretty simple to track. And I think as we enter these periods where ADR growth starts to slow down, the logical switch for every hotel owner is, okay, we start looking at expenses. And where can you control expenses? Because especially in an environment like right now where inflation's not out of control, but it's still pretty high, you got to look at where you can save on the expenses to really keep the hotel running at a profitable margin. So that is inherent in just kind of the cyclical nature of our industry, and I think we're always looking at cost savings. But on the guest side, I think you made a phenomenal point. I think it's about how you start approaching it with the guests. So, hanging up your towels was one that there was a little placard in the room and all of that, but maybe it becomes a front desk training session where you ask the guest, do you want housekeeping? Or we have this alternative option where it's just a light touch up, which is in reality is what you have at home, right? Nobody washes their towels every single night. Nobody changes their sheets every single night. Like, it's getting back to a norm but you can educate them as you're doing that and provide it as an option with an alternative with a story behind it. And so finding ways like that, and kind of like we've talked about, where the guests are actually leaning into it. So you lean into it with them, and you come up with ways where you can make it part of the guest story, the guest experience, and kind of the culture of the hotel, and that changes it, whereas you're not shaming them into it, you're not forcing them to do it, you're just giving them the option and a really interesting reason and story about why it's a good option and why they should be excited about it. But that's a pretty holistic change, and that's something we're working on, and like we talked about, kind of we're driving our marketing that way in a way because we're seeing engagement with it. So we're starting to shift in that direction.
So it looks like we have a question in the back, and this will be the last thing we do.
So I'm Staybridge Suites Ocala. Good. So I'm a size hotel developer operator out of Ocala, and we're long-term holders of the asset. So about 15 years ago, when being green is sexy now, but wasn't, there was a lot of things, low-lying fruit that we started to do that made a lot of sense. And then green became sexy. Where I feel that we need to really be purposeful about it is not go from one extreme to the other. And in terms of the guest, on the one hand, we tell them that green and sustainability, but then, we still have styrofoam in the breakfast. So starting up and laddering up, at least for the smaller developers and operators, makes a lot of sense. There's these trash bins in hotels where it says recycling and it says trash. But I'm curious, the brands that mandate that, have they ever really researched whether the trash collectors that say recycling and garbage were really having the intended effects? And because it takes a lot to implement stuff at a property. The training, like limited housekeeping. If the guests don't know about it, they ding the hotel because it wasn't communicated correctly. So then the brand knee-jerks and says, we're going to clean all the rooms again. So in kind of simplifying it, how we input data into, owners want to input data, but they want the process to be easy. So there's still a lot of opportunity between engagement between the brand and good owner focus groups on simplifying it and laddering up.
Any thoughts on that?
I'll say one, I think, to the points earlier about kind of cohesiveness and the power of doing it collectively. I think you're absolutely right. I think it also, it helps with the guest expectations if you're doing it across a wide swath of hotels rather than one-off hotels here and there. And I think that's where the collaboration with the brands and collaboration across the industry can really help, because if we're implementing things in a vacuum, it becomes a problem, to your exact point. But if we're looking at it saying, hey, we're saying we're sustainable, but to your exact point, we have styrofoam, why don't we look at other options? And, oh, it's expensive, but hey, if 500 hotels buy them, it's probably gonna end up being the same price if we go with a paper compostable option. So let's look at this collectively rather than each of us kind of figuring out our own path here. So I think you're spot on. I think it's a great comment.
I think leveraging the brand is where you can really gain efficiencies there, is, you know, also creating that consistency, right? If you're one hotel using styrofoam but another one using paper cups, right? So you creating that consistency and leveraging the brands and whatever marketing that they have as well that you can leverage to educate your guests, and training programs as well, because one of the most important things is training those frontline employees at the hotel on the ground to understand sustainability and to be a champion for sustainability. Because, I mean, believe it or not, like, it's maintenance, it's housekeeping, it's guest services. Like, the housekeepers, they're delighted that they don't have to do laundry and wash a gazillion towels every day, because, you know, they're training guests to save and, hey, hang up your towels. We don't have to wash it every night. I mean, those laundry machines aren't huge, and they have to, you know, it's very time consuming to go through the, you know, multiple runs and washes. So I think the employees are very much advocates for this, and they can be your advocate if they're trained correctly, if they have the right education and the training and the awareness of what these programs do and why they're being implemented. And then they can be be the ones engaging with the guests and engaging with the customers and helping them understand why these things are being done.
Absolutely. I would just add that part of this is obviously the feedback loop, and Navros and his team are incredibly gracious partners when we think about like how we get owner feedback and think about how we prioritize the different sustainability initiatives. So we're always open and receptive to that feedback, because that does help us to index priority on pieces. I think it also goes back to the realization that like this is a massively complicated space, right? And we're not going to solve for everything, nor should we kind of purport that we have solved for everything. So there's a level of humility that comes in the messaging and the opportunities here, right? Where we're not saying that we're the most sustainable. We're on a journey. We're trying to get there, and it's not going to be perfect, because, you know, one guest conception of sustainability is focused on food, another one's may be focused on carbon, another one's may be focused on X, Y, and Z factors. So there's always going to be some dimension that maybe you're not able to index higher or lower on. It's about just making sure that people understand that you are making a concerted effort in this space and deliberate with kind of how you're addressing this in a holistic fashion that we try to kind of take a tack towards.
Well, very good. We're at the end of our time. Thanks to these great panelists.
Thank you.